Well, ladies and gentlemen of the board, a person who doesn't need an introduction to you, but I'll do one anyway, Mr. John Albrecht. You have to go that way now.
Good evening, I'm Mrs. Medill.
Thank you for coming. Okay, John, tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. So, there's 18 questions, an hour length of time for the interview. If we get slow, I'll move us along. So here's the first question. The board's reviewed your resume and supporting materials, and everything in your application. But could you please tell them something about yourself that's not in your application documents, and then include in your answer why you're interested in being superintendent here in Wayne Westland?
Okay. Good evening, and certainly thank you for this opportunity. I really relish the opportunity to be candid and open with you. I could talk about all the things that I like to do in my life or my educational background, but I'm going to talk a little bit about me. My name is John Albrecht. I'm a servant of Wayne Westland Community Schools, and I believe in our community. Everybody who knows me knows that their needs come before mine. I believe that students grace our hallways are every bit as smart and competitive with any students anywhere in the country. I also believe that we have the hardest working teachers and staff and talent in our district as anybody anywhere. You had an opportunity over the last 3 years to watch me work. You've been a witness to what I can do when I can be collaborative and innovative. I do want to tell you, though, 6 years ago, I did write a letter of resignation to two of my very close friends who still work here. Talked me into not doing that, and I'm glad that I did. Now I have a chance to take the dream that I used to have and turn it into a vision and see that vision come to an end. The last 3 years has allowed me to grow in ways that I never imagined I could, and develop that vision for the school district. I want to lead those efforts that will see you and see our district be successful together. I want to see our students be successful, and I want to be able to build the trust and respect necessary to make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Could you give, excuse me, could you give the board some examples of how you would maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and the community if you were selected to be superintendent?
I will. I'll go back 15 years ago when I first became an administrator in the district. I had the opportunity to work very closely with the staff at John Glenn. I understood that my role was to be out there and be available and be there for them. 3 years after that, when I got to go to Wayne Memorial High School as a principal, it was probably the best experience that I had to be available for those groups. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I understood how critical it was to communicate with the community and let them know what the events were and what things were at Wayne Memorial High School. I've always made an effort to be visible in the community. I've been active in multiple groups, currently in Westland Rotary, and done a lot of things that way, which is one of the community groups I'm with. Some people know that I used to be president and league manager for Westland Youth Athletic Association. I did that for almost 13 years. I believe that my responsibility now as assistant superintendent has put me in a position that I can help a lot of families with their particular questions and needs related to their students, and I've been able to do that pretty successfully.
Okay, thanks. what do you think are the important issues in creating a good board-superintendent relationship? And how do you facilitate that relationship, and how will you communicate with this board if you're selected to be superintendent?
Well, it's important, I think, for the superintendent in particular, if it was me, to understand that the Board of Education represents the community, and as such, I would be an employee of the Board of Education. I would expect that I would be held accountable for our mission, vision, and goals, and would work toward being collaborative in that respect and be able to talk to the board on a regular basis. I understand my responsibility as a servant leader. At the same time, I understand that quite often community members will reach out to members of the Board of Education with things that are on their mind, and that's natural. I wouldn't want that to not happen. I think as a representative of the community, you need to be available to them. As such, I would like you to hope that you would pass those concerns along to me so that I could help get them resolved on your behalf. And of course, I would pass them on to my staff throughout the district, those that could help solve those problems.
Thanks. Describe your experiences with strategic planning from initiation to completion of outcomes.
So, been intimately involved in the strategic planning for our school district. First, let me say I think it's somewhat of a disappointing that an entity like ours has to start a strategic plan from scratch. And if I'm given this opportunity, we'll have a strategic plan far into the future, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this answer. But strategic planning has to start with a vision for your school district, and that vision has to be rooted in what we're actually all about, and that's teaching and learning. That happens when students and teachers come together in the classroom. So when we're talking about strategic planning, that's what has to drive it. The process calls for us then to seek out stakeholders across the community. That would be teachers, administrators, support staff, students, local government officials, anybody that would have an interest in our school district to provide input and feedback in what matters to them related to schools. The next step would be to pull some people together and look for some common themes that come up in what those stakeholders expect of schools. Once you have those common themes, you then can start to develop a plan to address them. And that was part of what I did. I was asked to work with the educational services team and staff from across the district to develop an instructional plan that will actually drive the work of the strategic plan. We have that in place. Once you get the strategic plan, or at least the major goals of the strategic plan in place, you have to set a timeline for that. And the timeline is very important because it has to integrate with whether or not you're going to need sources of revenue to make it happen. And certainly in our particular case, with some things that are all coming together at the same time, we have a bus fleet that's getting old. We have facilities that far exceed our student enrollment. And we have some challenges with being able to compensate our staff. And all those things coming together meant that we had to develop a plan that took all those things into consideration. So we've done that. The next thing to do is to begin the implementation process. Now, to go back to what I said, I would answer a little bit later. I think the next part of strategic planning is that at least annually, you come back together and you decide, just like you would in an extension of a contract, and you add at least a year onto it. There's always going to be another phase of a strategic plan. So once it's in place, it's not over with. There's always going to be work to do. There'll be things that will change, things that will cause us to think differently 6 years from now than we think right now.
Thank you. John, how would you recognize a collaborative leader? What behaviors would you see in a collaborative leader? And describe how you've collaborated with various stakeholders important to the school district's success.
I think the thing you would see most often with a real collaborative leader is someone who sought input and feedback from other people. And it's important that everyone that's offered an opportunity to speak gets a chance to speak and does so in such a way that they're confident that their input and feedback will be listened to and not in any way demeaned. And I think that's really important, because in order to build trust over time, whether the collaborator or the facilitator actually agrees with any of the particular input, you're not going to get input unless people feel confident that they can do that without any consequence. So those are the type of behaviors you would see. Another behavior was you would see the facilitator, collaborator reaching out to people, giving everybody a voice in the room. And it's typical that in a meeting of 15, 20, 30 people where you're seeking collaboration, that not every member will speak freely. So you have to give them an opportunity. You may have to actually ask them by name, "I haven't heard from you yet," and give them that opportunity. And if they feel confident that and trustful that we're listening, then you'll see that you'll get true collaboration. Probably the best experience I had in collaboration really ended up coming out far differently than I thought it was going to. A couple years ago, the state of Michigan told us that we got $1.1 million in at-risk money that we hadn't anticipated. The instructional people typically were used to using 31A at-risk dollars for instructional purposes. And so they started to plan on how we might use that. And I said, I don't want to do that yet. I want to pull some people together from across the district and get more voices in the room. And we talked a lot about who they would be. Ended up almost 50 people, and we had to do it in 2 meetings of 25 each. One at 2:30 because one group of people were available earlier in the afternoon, and that was secondary people, and another group at 4:15. We thought we would be going down the line of using those dollars for instructional purposes, but someone in the room that had a voice said, "Why can't we use those dollars to pay for programming that we currently use general fund dollars for, that are programs for at-risk students?" Took 2 more meetings before we got consensus. That put $1.1 million back in the general fund and actually got us over to 5% hump for this year, or for that year, I should say. And that's a true example of what collaboration can do. We started with thinking it was going to go one way and it went another, and it really benefited the district much better.
Thanks, Jen. Budgets can be seen as moral documents. Describe what process you plan to use to make sure that the Wayne Westland budget best represents the values of the district and the strategic plan.
That's a really, really, really important question. First of all, our mission is teaching and learning. So each time that we're going to be talking about spending any kind of our financial resources, it has to align with that. And sometimes we might have a question whether something aligns, and for instance, we have an aging bus fleet. We need transportation. That's not immediately directly tied to what happens in classrooms, but without it, it would seriously affect it. The enhancement millage passed a year ago. We got $1.1 million set aside for instructional purposes. We're not being careless with those dollars. We've had 2 opportunities to actually look at using those dollars for instructional purposes, but we asked if there were other funds that could be used instead. We found that, for instance, recently we approved the purchase of several 20 Chromebook carts and the Chromebooks that went with them. We found that $31A dollars could be used for, under the terminology of college and career readiness, and we still haven't used those enhancement millage dollars, knowing that 2 years out from now, we may have some financial challenges. We're gonna take care of those dollars until until we absolutely have to use them, because they may very well be necessary for us 2 years from now. So morally, just because they're in the budget doesn't mean you spend them.
Thanks. What do you think the most important leadership skill is?
I think the most important leadership skill is being able to recognize how important voice is. Real leaders understand that the only way you can be a great leader is to have people willing to follow you. And I think that's real, and a lot of people have heard me say that before. People are not going to follow you, they can't trust you, can't have confidence in you, and don't believe that their voice and their value is important. I love the educational services group that I have. I will tell you that the instructional plan was built while I was being being the acting principal at John Glenn High School. They were free to do that work, and all I did was follow up once in a while. That's what true leadership is it lets people do what their skill set allows them to do, and they grow and prosper because of it.
How have you improved student achievement in this district or in previous districts that you might have worked in? What are the challenges you see facing Wayne Westland Community Schools, and how would you address them?
Probably the best example that I have of how I've impacted student achievement goes back to the days that I was principal at Wayne Memorial High School. There were two really major issues that were facing that community, and one was just the general whirlwind that happened at the school every single day. Had a sense that it was just hard to concentrate on teaching and learning. And working with a group of teachers that we call the steering committee, we put some plans in place to get our whirlwind under control, if you would. Because once we were able to do that, then we were able to impact teaching and learning. The best way to do that is to really spend some time with all the stakeholders, all the people that impact student achievement in the building, talking about the actual data. It was important that we only looked at one piece of data and only concentrated on one thing at a time. As you know, we've layered enough initiatives on people that there's a lot going on. And so they weren't really excited the first time we did this, but I put on a PowerPoint slide in the conference room over there the actual attempted classes and the number of classes that were successful. I won't tell you what the percentage was, but it was embarrassing. It was dead silent in the room because they had never looked at that. They had heard before about looking at failure rates and those kind of things, and it usually led people to think that they needed to somehow modify their expectations of students. I told them point blank, I do not want you to lower your expectations. Our only job is to see how many more children each marking period can we get successful. And I promised them, I said, every time we're successful at doing that, without lowering our expectations. So question number 3, you still had to get it right in order to earn credit for that question. That I'd give them donuts and coffee and bagels, and we'd have a celebration. Well, it happened 19 grading periods in a row. They still do that today at Wayne Memorial High School. They've switched the concentration away from the failure rates of students over to the SAT and ACT scores because they got that other thing was gotten under control. And they took a vested interest in it. That's how you improve student achievement. So you take a look at what it is that you need to accomplish, you go after that particular thing. When you make it, then you can go after the next thing.
What role do you think the superintendent plays with the unions in a district?
Yeah, I don't even know if I would call it a role. I think it has to be a partnership. I know for a fact how hardworking all of our employees are. I know that they have the same objectives and the same goals that our Board of Education has and that I have. We all have the same. We have to find ways to build relationships and work together. It's an important part of the work that we do. There are going to be natural times that things are going to be difficult, but we work through those because we share the same goals. We do want students to achieve. We want to be able to be proud of the work that we do, and we are. I think that's critically important. I would like to, if I get this opportunity, I'd like to be able to have the leaders of the union close to the work that we do in central office, even if it means that one or two of them are members of the superintendent's cabinet. We had a situation the other day, another collaborative situation, in which we were talking about a homebound teacher situation, and we had 3 assistant superintendents, the president of the union, a principal from a high school, and the senior executive director of special ed. The original conversation ended up shifting to saving money, which wasn't what we were supposed to be talking about in the first place. We ended up ending without making a decision, but the president of the union sent us an email that was articulate and to the point, and it really made sense, and we backed up and said, we're not going to make this decision because it's the wrong decision right now. And that's the kind of thing, if we can't have that kind of relationship, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Thank you. This next question is kind of a softball, John. What's your familiarity with 5 dimensions of teaching and learning and the 4 dimensions of instructional leadership? And give examples of a strategy you've used to help educators learn and grow.
So I'm a little bit removed from this, but in the sense that I might not be able to give you a real good example for the second part of the question. But I am familiar with both of them. I did use the 4 dimension of instructional leadership with the assistant principals at John Glenn because I had to complete their evaluations in the spring when I was acting as principal. The 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, it's kind of disappointing that we have to have an evaluation tool, but the state says we have to. But it's so much more valuable as a growth instrument because it allows for teachers to feel professional in their work, and it allows for administrators to interact with teachers as professionals. Because the main component, I think the most important component of 5 dimensions is the self-assessment. I would assume every day of the week that our teachers are looking at their practice. They really want to be as good as they can be. They want to be distinguished at their work. And so that's a really important part. Using that tool then to help them and support them and coach them and getting better at what they do because they want to get better at what they do is an important part of it. Recently, while we were developing the instructional plan and working with Modern Teacher, one of the things is we have to have a really solid instruction model. I'll tell you, we were wrestling with all kinds of ideas. Teach like a champion, teaching with poverty in mind, a whole lot of different things were in our minds. And somebody in the room went, why aren't we just using the 5 dimensions as our instructional model? And it made sense, and we now actually have what Nick Appleby is the one that designed it, a design of something that we could put up in the schools, and you'll see all 5 of those dimensions. So it's going to be a very, very valuable instrument because our staff's going to grow as they use it.
Thanks. Describe how you would provide the freedom to allow others to do their job, yet hold them accountable for the outcomes of their work.
So if you're a real good leader, you can do this well. And I'll be honest with you, you hold your breath a lot. I mean, you really do. But you do have to give people room to grow. And that means that they will make mistakes. And you have to be prepared that that will happen. So if I'm giving you some room to be independent and make some independent decisions, then I have to own the outcomes. If they're not good, if they don't go the way they should, then as your leader, I have to accept the responsibility for that because I'm the one that gave you the latitude to make those decisions. I've had a lot of experience with that. My two most greatest experience was when I was principal at Wayne Memorial High School, and all three of the assistant principals ended up principals. One's a superintendent, one's a director of curriculum and instruction in another school district. The third one became a principal in ours and decided to go into a different career. But that's because they, I'll be honest with you, they made a few mistakes, but I took care of that. And I told them that they needed to be independent, needed to make decisions on their own, feel free to be innovative and creative, and that I would own the outcomes. The second one is the one that's going on right now as a leader of educational services. There's 13 different directors that are part of that group. They're free to do their work an awful lot of the time. I have to own those outcomes. That can be challenging because of the further up, down the ladder. I'm going to say the further down the ladder because I've envisioned the organizational chart differently than a lot of people do. They have more responsibility, but they also have more opportunity to make mistakes that might be more, might be bigger, might be more greater influence on, or impact on the community.
John, what's your experience with parents who choose another school district instead of their own? Why do you suppose they make these choices, and what can be done?
I've had some. I've had it at the very personal level, and I don't want to go down that road, but there's only one way, and I would talk about this in every walk of life that I can. We have to be ready and prepared to speak in the positive, and talk about what we're great at, because we are. And we're great at many, many, many more things than we might not be good at. The reality of the fact is that the people that I talked to, I'm not sure I had a great deal of confidence that they were telling me the truth of why they were going somewhere else. I just didn't. I know that's true of the personal one that I'm talking about. The reality is we are Wayne Westland, and we are who we are. And we can provide the best education for our students, who they are, better than anybody else in the world. If we accept who we are, and when we accept who we are, we'll do that. When you've had 6 Gates Millennium Scholars in the last 7 years, those are $500,000 scholarships. We're doing something. When we have wrestling teams that are going to the state finals, we're doing something. There's some amazing things that are happening in our school district, and we need to talk about those in the positive, way more than we do. The other thing I would say, and I would say this to everybody in the audience, everybody that works in schools, when you get that opportunity in blogs or in social media, all those kind of things, be cognizant of what people might hear when you communicate. You know, we might want to say something about the children we work with. That message is not heard the way you meant it. We got great kids. And I'll say that and say it and say it. And I've had that opinion ever since I was 8 years old. And the first time I saw There's No Such Thing as Bad Boys Town, and with Spencer Tracy, I believe that. There's no such thing as a bad boy. We've got great kids.
Thanks. Considering your past accomplishments, what are some of the reasons for your success?
Yeah, that was, well, up until about 3 years ago, that was challenging. Being able to be patient with the process, understanding that it takes time. I can remember every once in a while we would attempt to do something, and 4 or 8 weeks later, you'd get, I'm not seeing it. I mean, research says that a teacher in a classroom wanting to attempt a new initiative or a new strategy in a classroom has to do it 6 times before it becomes effective, and 7 times before the kids get that this is the way we're going to do work. You can't do it the first time. You can't do it overnight. It takes time. It takes time to develop. It takes time for it to happen. I think that that's critical. So I'm a patient person. I understand it takes time. I understand that I may have to coach and guide and move things forward. Having been a coach in basketball, girls basketball in Detroit, in a school when I first took over that had lost 93 games in a row, I had to be a real patient person. We got better because we worked at it. It takes time for that to happen. That's just an example of one thing that I'm talking about.
Could you reflect on one of your most difficult administrative situations and how you handled it and how you arrived at your decision?
So I could speak a little bit about the position that I found myself in 6 years ago, but I'm not. I've already implied that. I think the hardest thing that I've ever had to do is I've been promoted to assistant principal, executive director, and now assistant superintendent. And every single time I've ended up supervising people that were my colleagues. And in those particular situations, I've come across a situation each time that I needed to be direct. I needed to work with somebody who wasn't getting the job done. And it was extremely difficult to do because before they were a colleague and a friend. They still are a colleague and a friend, but those things had to be confronted. It's hard for people in education because we all got great hearts. That's why we got into it in the first place. But the reality is, if someone's performance is actually going to hurt kids, we have to address it right away. It is difficult to do, but you have to do it in a professional manner, but it has to be done. And I will tell you, it never gets easy.
Okay. John, if you were selected to lead the school district, you would be inheriting a strategic plan that's been both adopted and endorsed by the school board, the staff, and the community. Based on your knowledge and research of the district and a strategic plan, what challenges would you face as a new superintendent, and what strengths would you bring to addressing these challenges?
I think the biggest challenge that I would face, and I'm certainly any candidate that ended up with the job, is that trying to implement the strategic plan, begin the implementation of the strategic plan, at the same time you're going through a change curve and people are getting used to the fact that they got a new leader, is going to be really challenging. It's going to take somebody that's really strong, got the stamina and the courage to do that work. I think that's going to be me, but it is going to be hard to do. The community is going to want the new superintendent to be available at the games, at the concerts, at the schools, at the events. Somebody today at Rotary said, it gave me something, said, here's somewhere you need to be. And I mean, it's going to be a busy schedule. At the same time that you're going to be trying to, whoever it is going to be trying to meet with constituent stakeholder groups to help set up and get prepared to get our strategic plan fully implemented. Get the work done related to choice work and trying to figure out which is work, trying to figure out where we're going to be and what is our structure and configuration going to look like that's going to best align with our instructional plan. That's not going to be easy work. And it's going to take somebody that's really strong and got the courage to do it. I think that's me. The strengths that I have, I know almost every major stakeholder in the community. There are people that I interact with regularly. I see them when I'm out and about. My wife and I spend almost all of our time, leisure time, if you will, in this community. We were at Gowdy Park last night for the concert in the park. I interacted with a significant number of people down there, city council members, the mayor, and those kind of people. I have those kind of relationships. Those are strengths. and they can help us in getting our strategic plan implemented and making those really hard decisions that are going to come down the road.
Thanks. As superintendent, how do you create a climate that values diversity and inclusion? Give some specific examples of how you've done this in your positions.
So I'm going to go back. This kind of work takes time, but you model it. And you have to model it all the time. You have to understand that we are diverse. We have people from every kind of walk of life you can imagine. We have to be ready to accept people for who they are, but you do that by modeling it. I will tell you, in the 13 weeks that I was at John Glenn, I went to the lunchroom every day. We're a lot further along than I think people think. When you see just how students intermingled in that cafeteria each day. And that was good. So now I'm in the cafeteria, or I'm in the hallways, or I'm in the community. I interact with everybody. There's nobody that I don't interact with. And that's extremely important. So through modeling, you do that. You make sure that the way you treat individual people in certain circumstances are the same all the time. That has to be consistent. Even discipline in a school, it was important. I would say that when I was principal, I didn't just say it, but when I was principal at Wayne Memorial High School, we looked at our discipline data. And it better break down over male, female, and racial lines exactly percentage based on the number of students that were in those categories at the school. Because I didn't want people to be treated differently because they had some different characteristic. It's wrong. So you model it, and you pay attention to it. That's it.
Okay. Would you share any experiences that you've had in gathering community support for issues facing the school district?
Yeah, probably. I mean, normally, I haven't been a superintendent, so superintendents are the face of the district, and typically they do most of that kind of interaction. But I've had plenty of opportunities. Interacted with the Rotary Club at Wayne, the Rotary Club of Westland, when we were trying to institute teen courts in our high schools, and they provided the financial resources for the actual materials to build those classrooms. That's one example. Last year, our DECA Club had 3 kids that qualified for international competition in Anaheim, California. I went to a couple organizations and was able to get $1,000 toward the cost of them going there, so it wasn't totally a burden on the students and the DECA Club. Those are the type of things, but you have to be ready to go out and ask for that kind of help.
Okay. All right, John, we've come to the end of the official questions. And the last question is, you've been asked a number of questions this evening on a broad range of topics. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the board that they haven't asked you about that might support your candidacy?
Yeah. I don't think, well, let me think. I want to make sure that you know how passionate I am about the work that I do. I'm so happy that I was given an opportunity to stay working in the district at a time when I was really frustrated, and I gritted my teeth and I overcame that. I like coming to work every day. I like the work we're doing. I can't tell you how excited I am about what I see we're going to be in 5 or 6 years and what it's going to look like in our classrooms. When students are going to be able to learn any time of day or night, any day of the week, and when our teachers' work is going to be zeroed in on the work that they do every single day, which is interacting with students and helping them learn and grow. It must be unbelievably difficult to do that today without the use of technology in the classroom. But if we leverage technology correctly and create learning environments that really, really, really make sense for the 21st century kids, we won't be dealing with the lack of focus that we have. We'll be focused. We'll get where we want our children to go. I want you to understand how important it is that we continue to build relationships that we've been building over the last 3 years. I know that I can lead that work and keep it going. The voices I've heard, just for instance, when I worked at John Glenn, those people are so passionate about the work that they do. They care so much about what's going on. They weren't in a good place. They needed somebody to listen to them. And I did that. I didn't get them everywhere they had to go, because 13 weeks just isn't enough time. But I understand now what they, because I've been gone for a while away from the school. It's a lot clearer in my mind what it means to support people at the school level. I want to keep working on building respect and trust with the employees of this school district. I have to overcome that, and I'm still working on it. I want to be given the opportunity to do that. With that being said, thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Okay. Don't leave. So while she makes sure that he's settled, we're gonna get ready to go into the next process. So don't go anywhere.
All right, so, this is the process as we go forward, as we've discussed, although there's been some new information. Okay, so at this point, you've listened to all the candidates, and it's your charge now to make a determination as to which candidates you might want to bring back for further consideration. And I'm going to, Cheryl is collecting the data sheets that from the community input. And these are the ones from the other night. So you're going to have an opportunity, probably for 20, 30 minutes, whatever you need, to review these comments, to look at your notes, to think about what you've heard, and then we'll come together and I'll have you do the matrix, and then you'll discuss the candidates. However, President Walker has brought to my attention that a couple of pieces of information have come to light of a personnel nature that we need to hear about, and we don't need to hear about it in open session. So she's asked that you go into closed session just for the purpose of sharing this information that you don't really want to share in public, which is what we did as you selected the candidates, as you remember. It's not for discussion, it's not for deliberation in closed session, it's just to share the information with all board members, okay? So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. So President Walker, if you want to do the closed session now.
Okay. So, at this time, we're going to go into, I'd like to take a motion to go into closed session just to discuss personnel issues that need to be about personal things,
And then we'll come back out
and
and
then we'll
you'll
come
do
back
your,
out and we'll do the deliberation and everything in open session. So
Right.
at this time, I'll take a motion, moved by Mrs. Madison, supported by Mr. Cox. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Medill?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mr. Buckaroo?
Yes.
Dr. Weaver?
Yes.
Ms. Hines, yes. Ms. Madison? Yes. Ms. Walker?
Yes.
Let the record show 7-0.
Okay, we are in closed session, so if I can ask everyone to leave the room.
do you guys want to leave and just go?
Oh, yeah, we can leave. Stay here. We can go. We'll go away. That'll be easier.
I don't want to go.
This from the man who hasn't been here? Because he's always walking away?
I thought I'd change.
We're gonna go down to the cabinet room.